This is Milestones in partnership with WBGO Studios. I'm your host, Angelica Beener. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here joining me. Here we take deep dives into milestone moments in music and culture during landmark years. This year marks the 50th anniversary of what has been universally considered the ultimate concept album. I'm speaking, of course, of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. For this episode, I could not be more thrilled to be joined by one of the greatest guitarists of his generation, Mike Moreno. He has played with everyone from Joshua Redman to Michelle Ndegeocello, from Common to Terence Blanchard, and many, many more. Recognized as one of the leading voices in jazz guitar, Moreno has toured extensively and recorded as a leader of his own band, playing his original music to critical acclaim. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, Moreno designed and developed a 14-week course, Standards from Film, which inspired his most recent release. The course itself dove deeply into the cultural history and harmonic evolution of 14 iconic jazz standards from the golden age of Hollywood. Since then, he has released the album Standards from Film in 2022 on the Crisscross label, available now everywhere. He is a true Pink Floyd aficionado, and I cannot wait to explore this album through his tremendous insights. Let's get into it. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
When I thought about this record, you were the first person that came to mind. So, yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. It's one of those records where even before I was 100% sure I was going to be a musician, like it was part of my life already, just through friends, hanging out with friends and listening to music and, yeah. So it goes all the way, it goes all the way back to, junior high school with me when it came onto my radar in a very serious way.
Wow. So tell me more about that. We're here talking about this now iconic album. It was released March 1st, 1973. So this week, 50 years ago, and would go on to spend, I think, 14 years or something crazy like that on the Billboard charts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And people call it, the ultimate concept album. Of course, we're talking about Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. But I'd love to know more about how this album came into your consciousness.
Well, for me, for sure, it was first riding in the car with some of my best friends. My best friend Paul at the time was a drummer, and we were playing music together. We were playing like kind of heavy rock, like all the bands that we were listening to at the time. And it was just like covers. We were just playing all of our favorite tunes. But he was always kind of listening to music that was beyond that. I was more just a kind of like a heavy metal kid. And I didn't listen to much outside of that, other than the pop music that was on television and stuff. I mean, I knew all the Michael Jackson stuff and, a lot of the, Stevie Wonder and things like that were on the radio. And I liked that music. But as a guitar player, I was playing all this kind of, hard rock, kind of heavy metal stuff. And, but he was listening to this album, and we would just drive around and check out the radio, or he would have tapes in the car and just start playing stuff. And we were listening to this album for sure during that time. And he said, at the Natural History Museum, there's a laser light show. We need to go, and he had already been. So we went, and every weekend, there was a Pink Floyd laser light show. And it might have been during the week too, but I can't remember the exact days. But so we just started going like on a regular basis. And it was amazing. It was this place, I have some, like, just because I kind of went down this little interview took me down a trip down memory lane, So I was like thinking about it, and I found like these kind of pictures, of so this was the planetarium, like outside of the Natural History Museum. And this is where you would kind of walk back right down this little walkway here and then go in the front entrance. And then the main entrance into the planetarium was inside. So we were going here and just laying down in that dome. And, it was always packed. And so it had these kind of reclining seats. So we would be in here just like totally just like looking up at this dome. And they would play the record from start to finish. And it was the most intense way to listen to that record. And at the time, it was, I knew that there was something special about this album. I was like, nothing sounds like this. Nothing takes an audience on a journey like this. And it was because it was the ultimate concept album. The songs weave in and out of each other. And especially if you think of the tunes like Breathe and Time, where they do the whole song Time. And then at the very end, they just go back to Breathe.
Breathe.
Yeah. And then,
genius.
They're just kind of like, oh, let's go back to the first song we started off. It's the whole album it's almost like a time warp. Like you're just going through like black holes and then coming out in another tune. And then, the songs are reborn in different keys and they just jam on the chord changes and they're just like improvising. And, at the time I was like, this is way different than anything I've heard, and it was way beyond my head. Like it was over my head at the time, but I liked it. That was the whole thing with this album. It was deep if you wanted to go there, or you could just have it in the background and you could jam to this record, or you could just let it, lightly take you on a journey. But if you wanted to completely immerse yourself, this was the place, this planetarium, like with everybody just like succumbing, like just like, yeah, like there's nothing else, no phones. This was before cell phones. Like people just went in there, laid down, probably smoked a few,
doobies.
Yeah, before they went in there. And it was just like, let's just check out Dark Side of the Moon. And there was nothing else like that. And then I moved to New York, and they were doing it in New York. It wasn't this cool, but it was at the Natural History Museum in New York too. And it was stadium seating, so it wasn't lying down, it wasn't in the planetarium, but it was still, I was like, man, this album is like beyond, it's just transcended like so much. It's become so much more than just a record people put on.
So when you're at the planetarium in Houston, what are the visuals? What are you seeing while you're listening?
That was the main thing that set it apart. So when I went to see it in New York, it was just kind of like the screen at this planetarium was the most high tech at the time. Very few museums had something like it. And, when I think back, I was like, man, there's so much cool stuff about Houston that people kind of don't know about. And one of the things is the museum culture in Houston. So this planetarium was one of the most kind of high definition screens. The audio was amazing. And the lasers that they had, are the projection system was the highest tech at the time. And so they were crystal clear. Like it was like being in space. So it was all these images kind of like moving, and it was like a fireworks show almost, but very slow. And I can't really remember. I just remember it was super trippy. It was so fun to watch. And even at the time, like there was nothing cheesy about it. That's the only thing. Is like I remember when I went to see it in New York, I was like, this is kind of cheesy. And it was a little bit of a disappointment. But I mean, the one in Houston was just like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever.
Wow, that's amazing.
And they're bringing it back. So I'm going to go to Houston maybe this month or next month. And they brought it back, of course, for the 50-year anniversary.
Sure.
I don't know if it ever completely went away. I think they would still do it sometimes. But it was such a thing. And, there would be just the craziest mix of people there. Like, definitely Pink Floyd fans and some people that were just there to see it, Maybe even hear the album for the first time.
Yeah. And who doesn't love, a trippy, LSD-inspired light show? I mean, that sounds freaking amazing. That sounds so cool.
Yeah,
I think my first foray into Pink Floyd, I was like 12, and my sister was working for Columbia Sony, and she sent me all this music to camp when I was at sleepaway camp.
Oh wow!
And she sent me a care package. Yeah, I was like all these CDs, and The Wall was in there. And with like New Kids on the Block and Branford Marsalis and
wow.
Terrence Blanchard, and then there was The Wall. But I know The Wall like came out in I think like 79.
79, yeah.
So I had to kind of work my way backwards to Dark Side of the Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of my earliest like experiences of knowing about the record, you had told me about syncing, like they were syncing it up to The Wizard of Oz.
Dark Side of the Moon, yeah. Yeah, so when I finally got a DVD player, you know, I remember when I got a DVD player and like a flat screen TV in my apartment, and one of the first DVDs I bought was like, I mean, I bought a lot of DVDs from my childhood, but one of them was The Wizard of Oz. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to finally check it out and see if I can sync it up. And I had the CD, of course, from when I was a kid, and I had the DVD now. So I did it for the first time. And of course, it was like, wow, this is crazy. But, you know, if you put anything, you know, any movie with, you know, turn off the audio and put on a record, you know, there's going to be some coincidences. But those are pretty cool. Because
they are pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, I know Pink Floyd is denied, you know, any conscious ties.
And they're basically like, they're like, of course there's things that are going to line up. They're like, it's like, but it's bullshit. Why would we do that?
But it's a trip though. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I think more of that. So, you know, for our listening audience, do you want to just describe like what we're talking about specifically? So there was this, I guess, an urban myth, right? About the synchronicities. Yeah,
people were just saying that that Pink Floyd wrote Dark Side of the Moon to sync up with Wizard of Oz. And that's what they're saying is just as being like, why? Why would we do that? You know?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the whole conspiracy theory that it was meant to be that way. Yeah.
Right. But like you're saying, more realistic, what's likely is just that you have trippy imagery on screen, you have this trippy music, and there's some interesting overlap.
Yeah, there's, you know, like there's some parts in the lyrics that go with what's happening in the movie, like when they say like balancing on the biggest wave or tallest wave. And then Dorothy's balancing herself like this, like on the fence, and there's a bunch of them. You know, when Money starts is when the Wizard of Oz goes from black and white to color, things like that happen right in sync if you start the DVD in the right place. So yeah, it's kind of crazy how much in sync it is at certain points. But I've only really gotten it to be that close like a couple of times because you really got to start it in the right place.
Yeah, it's like they said, like when the MGM lion has to roar on the third
time after, you got to just do it. It's like, wait, what? You know, you're trying to like follow instructions from some like stoner, like online on some blog, you know? It's like, yeah, man, just like.
But I think that goes with what you were saying about this being like the ultimate concept record.
Yeah,
and in a way that it's so much more than a record, right?
Yeah, it's become just this whole myth kind of thing of everybody has these ideas of what the songs are about, and you know, and it's a lot of people just listening to this record so much that they just kind of start inventing stories or are trying to make it more than it actually is, which is the coolest part. You know, it's like it's out of the hands of the band. You know, as soon as it was printed, you know, it's like, okay, you know, this is not ours anymore. This belongs to the audience, and everyone's having a different experience with the music, you know, and it's taking them to different places. And so that's the cool thing about the album. It's so like I get images when I listen to it, and some of that could date back to first hearing it, you know, so much in this kind of planetarium and seeing all those trippy images. But I really felt like I was in space when I was like listening to it. It really felt like you're just on this kind of journey, just like going through tunnels, and it's an amazing record.
Yeah, you're making me want to get a flight to Houston just to go to experience this. Because I mean, I would love to do something like this, especially with take my son with me. I mean,
oh yeah, that could be really fun, actually.
Yeah, and so you were talking about this age where you and your friend were checking out this more rock music and stuff like that in your background. Tell me about what you were listening to at the time that this record came into your consciousness? Like, what were you checking out? And then when did you start checking out jazz?
At that time, this had to have been like 92, 93, somewhere around there. So I was kind of really I was into Steely Dan at this time. So I was kind of segueing into the jazz world with that kind of music, and a lot of Zeppelin at the time. I was listening to Van Halen. I was listening to still some of the bands that I used to listen to, like Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer, and like I love that kind of stuff. And so it was a lot of what else was Steve Miller Band we were checking out. There was a lot of kind of spacey 70s rock. Yes, we were checking out Yes and Cream and all kinds, Ozzy Osbourne. And it was just a lot of riding around in cars in Houston. There wasn't much to do. We were broke, so we had, everybody put in $2 for gas and let's drive around and listen to records. That was basically like me hanging out with some of my best friends. And we would just listen to the radio, and then we would put on records. See what was on the radio, and it was always kind of classic rock stuff that we were listening to, those stations, never jazz stations. So all the classic rock stations, and then classic rock was just funny because, when I started listening to this record, it wasn't even 20 years old yet. So it's kind of a little bit crazy. So 1992, yeah, the record was like 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now we're talking about it like it's 50 years old. It's kind of crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Isn't that a trip?
19 years old is not that crazy. I mean, I've done records that are 19 years old. So it's like, and they don't sound like Dark Side of the Moon, So yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about.
And then jazz, I know you went to HSPVA, High School of Performing and Visual Arts in Houston, a wide variety of stellar alumni, musicians, artists, dancers. I know we always say like, oh, we had like Billy D. Williams. I know you guys had like Patrick Swayze, right? Didn't Patrick Swayze go to your school?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't think he did.
I think I heard that. Okay.
He might have gone there. He might be from Houston. Yeah. But I mean, when I was there, we had Beyonce, who I mean,
okay, way to flex, Mike.
Yeah, but she I'm just thinking like the biggest superstar to come out of that school was definitely her. I mean, and I didn't know what she did when I knew her there. She was Beyonce. I kind of knew she was in the vocal department. That's about it. But yeah, it was an incredible school, and actually my girlfriend, when I started going to that school, I started dating a girl, and our first date was the Pink Floyd Laser Light Show, because it was the coolest thing that I knew about at the time, where her parents would actually drop her off, because she was like 15 and, I was 16. So where are you going to take them on a date other than the movies? I was like, this is way cooler than a movie. And she had never heard Dark Side of the Moon. So we went there and just like, maybe checked out the Laser Light Show.
Right. Maybe the light show was checking.
But I was like,
out.
It's like she had really strict parents, and it was like, oh, it's at the Natural History Museum. It's very educational, Pretty romantic first date, actually.
I would imagine so. I mean, I'm the age I am, and I want to go on a first date to this. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And so, is that also when you started getting into jazz? Is that when?
Yeah, when I started going to that school, I was already. I knew that I had to get into jazz to be a part of the school. So at the time, I was like, I don't know if I want to play rock and classical. Like I was thinking I wanted to enhance my, music theory and kind of knowledge about music through classical music. But when I went to audition for the school, or at least go to a meeting about auditioning, and the Doc Morgan, the director of the program, was just like, we don't have a classical guitar program. So if you play classical guitar, we don't have a place for you, unfortunately. So he was like, but you can study jazz. And he asked me like a couple questions about chords that I couldn't answer. And he was like, well, you probably want to figure that stuff out before the audition. And I mean, I didn't know anything about music theory at the time when I went to that meeting. And so I went to my teacher, and he basically taught me how to build chords and like the basics of music theory. And I started learning tunes, and then I did the audition and got in.
Do you remember what you played to get in?
Yeah, I played So What. I played Freddie the Freeloader and Monk tune, the Well You Need It.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
those are the
amazing.
3 tunes I played.
That's no small feat. I mean, coming from, a background that did not include jazz at all, and then playing 3 tunes.
Yeah. I mean, we had to play 3 tunes. Luckily, they didn't ask for a ballad. That would have been impossible for me to do at the time. But
play
yeah.
So what really slowly.
Yeah. I still remembered like Doc Morgan like walking bass on the piano for my solo. But yeah,
Wow.
I remember some things about the audition, and I felt pretty good after the audition, and and just by his reaction, But then right after that, I went to a student concert, and it was Eric Harlan was playing drums, and another teacher at the school named David Caceres, and a guitar player that was going there at the time named Stefan Schultz, who was incredible. And they were in the main combo, and they were playing with Milt Hinton. So Milt Hinton was the guest artist.
Oh,
and
wow.
They were doing like bebop and like some other tunes. I can't remember what else the tune, but I remember when they played bebop, it was and I was just like just watching them play this music, and I was like, there's no way I'm getting in. And I just left there, and my mom was with me. I was just like, yeah, I got to think about something else. And then I got a letter and said, you've been accepted. So
yeah, because they weren't freshmen when you were listening.
No, they were
to them,
seniors.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Eric was about to graduate. Yeah.
Yeah, so they heard what we all now know is that you are, easily one of the greatest of your generation and beyond. You're an incredible musician.
Well, now I'm a Hall of Famer from the. Me and Kendrick Scott got our Hall of Fame awards from the high school in December.
What was that like?
It was really cool. I mean, it felt good in that sense because I still remember like walking out of the theater and being like, there's no way I'm going to get in, so I remember that like very vividly, and like how excited I was when I did get in, and how excited I was the first day of school walking in with my guitar. I'd never done that before. Got out of my parents' car with my guitar and like going to school. It's like, this is different, and so
it's a vibe.
Yeah. I never took it for granted like the whole time I was there. So yeah. So then when that happened, I was like, okay, this is kind of cool, to get it's just an award, but it felt, I've seen some of my, like Eric Harlan got it, and so many great musicians from that school. So it was a little bit of like, okay, cool, and maybe I belong with these guys.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, you do. When describing this record genre-wise, I guess you could say that it's part psychedelic rock, part prog rock, but there's also like great improvisation on the record. And so I wondered if you could talk to me about how you would describe the relationship between rock and jazz, especially in the early 70s. I think of people like Larry Coryell and even Hendrix, Weather Report. But like, how do these genres sort of organically come together for you?
It just seems kind of at the time when you think of these kids in these bands at that time, I mean, they were just kids, they're early 20s.
Yeah.
So you got to think of them growing up with their parents, and their parents were listening to jazz, or listening to music that was at least recorded by jazz musicians. So, the studio musicians from that period in the 50s, they were all jazz musicians. So whether you're listening to, Frank Sinatra or something like a singer group, like a doo-wop group, like the studio musicians could kind of go both ways. And so I just think it was a part, like, the great musicians from those time periods knew chord theory, at least could play by ear, and they could improvise. And those are the people recording the albums, and so there was a lot of cross pollination, and a lot of the pop artists even came from jazz backgrounds. And so I think for, in the British rock scene, and this album, like the way that they're playing over it doesn't feel. I mean, it's very bluesy, but they're still kind of playing voicings that are coming from more jazz kind of sounds. And even in the first tune, Richard Wright, the piano player, when he was writing the chord changes to Breathe, like he referenced, there's an interview where he's talking about how he used a D7 sharp 9 chord because he heard it in All Blues from the Miles Davis record. So like if you check out Breathe, like the chord changes are just E minor. They're just E minor to A major. But, the kind of voicings that David Gilmour is using, he's kind of using like a minor 9, like, and it's like a cluster, So instead of just like he's putting in like these kind of tension notes that you don't normally hear in a rock kind of setting. I mean, not back then, And a lot of the major chords sometimes have major 7s in them. I mean, sometimes just a triad. And then, I mean, that's not a rock progression, like. So, and I remember when I first saw like that interview with Richard Wright where he's talking about this tune, and I was like, wow, that's like a direct, like he didn't even say, oh, I was listening to jazz. He was like, I was listening to Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, and I know what tune he's talking about, thinking about All Blues. So, those chords. And he said, I wanted to do something different than just the 5 chord, which the 5 chord would have been a B7. So that's just a minor third up. So he's just going, instead of going to B, he's going to D. And then kind of a diminished chord, walking up to the E. So really, really cool and different sounding. And those were stuff, like when I was a kid, I couldn't hear what they were doing. I could hear this. But it was always that chord, like, what is that? Yeah, just beautiful. And they're just kind of, that's the whole tune, really. Like they're just vamping on that for the most part, with all these different parts, the pedal steel, playing those, those kind of parts, but it's with a slide and it sounds really cool. But yeah, really, really cool changes on all those tunes.
Changes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they're gorgeous, and I love the way you've broken them down in bite-sized pieces like that. Let alone just getting the treat to hear you, just live solo. To go back to what you said about him referencing All Blues, and that now I hear the part you're talking about. Ba-da-dee-da-da.
Yeah,
part,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
got it.
right.
And you would think that, he would say maybe, oh, I was checking out Bitches Brew or something like that. But the fact that he references, to your point, something that came out in 1959, you really helped me understand how that could be. Like you said, this is what's probably being played in the home, and the age that they are, if we do the math, I mean, it makes sense that they would be checking out that stuff. I mean, their name alone, a long time ago, I found out that they named their band after these two African-American blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. And I think even that he was influenced by Booker T and the MGs and stuff like that. So there's no doubt. I mean, like you were talking about, just those British bands, checking out the black music from across the pond,
Oh yeah,
you know.
they were definitely heavily influenced by blues. Like,
Yeah.
and they give it up. If you talk about or see all those interviews from back then, they're just like, yeah, we just want to sound like them. You know?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Which you love, I love the fact that they gave it up because oftentimes, versus here,
Hmm.
as we all know, there was more of a predilection to steal
Hmm.
instead of to be influenced by and to give credit, and almost like you can feel like it's an homage. I feel like
Yeah.
the Brits did a much better job of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all over that music. I mean, the Rolling Stones, like, Zeppelin. Like, if you listen to all those lead singers, it's like, wow, you can really hear what they were checking out, where they were getting ideas from. They just,
Yeah.
they just turned their amps up till they just basically blew up. You know, all of the overdrive and on those records, it's like it's incredible. Like the sounds that they were getting in the studios.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about David Gilmour.
Hmm.
So my understanding is that, Syd Barrett was kind of
Mm.
the nucleus of the group up until 1968. He had done the majority of, I think, the lyrics as well.
Yeah.
But he had some mental health challenges, and I think some serious drug challenges as well. And uh, I guess they let him go, or he, decided, to leave the band. And in comes David Gilmour in that same year, 1968. They
I think there was a time where they were both in the band together,
Oh,
maybe
is that
just for like a
right?
short period of time, because he
They're
was basically coming in and pick up the slack and make sure that the parts were covered and stuff like that.
How great of a player is David Gilmour? Where, because there's a lot of, you see Rolling Stone have these like 100 greatest drummers, and some of those lists are,
Hmm.
complete, bullshit. But what are your thoughts about David as a player?
I love his playing, and it's funny because I've been listening to this music for so long before I was like critical about guitar itself, and going back and listening to it and analyzing it, everything he plays is so simple, but it's so
Mm.
so melodic. It's so memorable, and the tone is incredible. Um, he's not. It's not like Hendrix, where it's like Hendrix is just going off. He's playing like the most incredible stuff on the guitar, and it could be aggressive, it could be funky, it could be beautiful. Gilmour is just like even when you see him, he's kind of stoic a little bit, and but he's just like this quiet beast, and
Mm.
everything it just has so much intensity, like the bends, and it's very saturated sound. So he's always has tons of reverb and delay on the guitar, which puts it in that space of like being very psychedelic. And um, but the melodic content, every one of his solos, you can sing them. There's no like point
Mm.
in the solo where you can't sing what he's playing, and even if you listen with headphones on to the record, you could hear him singing. I don't know if they had a mic in the room to capture that, and they wouldn't use it all the time. They would just use his voice here and there to highlight some of what he was playing, and it's really cool. But for sure, it feels like he's just singing when he plays,
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's incredible. Like it's so, and it's part of the reason why the band is so successful, because the guitar solos are just part of the music. And in that way, he kind of has to play those solos live,
Right.
because
He's kind of locked in.
they are melodies. They like without them, the tunes aren't the same. Especially when you start getting into tunes like any color you like, and the kind of jam tunes where he's just playing solos over it. But what he's playing is now the melody, because
Wow.
it's just a chord progression. So. And some of them are just two fives, like that recurring thing of breathe. You know, it's on a few songs where so when they're just playing, except they have, you know, like some effects going on, but some of the stuff he's playing, and of course the sounds he's getting, you know, when it's just like kind of these almost like Leslie sounds, you know, and it kind of with wah. I can't really play it, you know, but it's like some of the ideas are just, it sounds like somebody's singing through a wah pedal. It's crazy. I mean, all of that. I mean, the amount of thought that he went into getting guitar sounds, and it's crazy. Like all the stuff that he's plugged into, and like how they mic'd everything and how they mixed it. It's all about the vibe and the sound. But what he's playing himself is not like the most incredible guitar stuff you by far. It's just so good. Just so good. The melodies.
Yeah, great melody, great placement. You know, certain things can be said of certain jazz musicians where it's not about flying up and down the keyboard or playing the, you know, a Coltrane solo, but the feel, you know, the aura, the vibe, like you said, and that lyricism that you were talking about. I mean, that goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're in a band and you're trying to. I mean, for me, there's a reason why this song just stayed on the charts, or this album, and it's just like every aspect of it was kind of, it was just singable, and it's stuck in your head. Like once you heard, you know, any of those ideas, it was just like, oh my God, you know.
I was gonna say there's from Breathe going into On the Run. There's it's so eerie to me, that fast sort of bass synth.
Yeah.
You know, it just, I mean, I'll be honest, I can't necessarily listen to this album at night and I'm by myself. Like I'm not putting on Dark Side of the Moon because it's so eerie, or even like the clocks in time.
Yeah.
Which kind of reminds me of, you know, that song by the Chambers Brothers, Time Has Come Today? Came out in like, they go like, time, you know.
Oh no, I don't know that.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
But they're going like time, and then it like slows down. You hear like the ticking, and they're saying time.
Yeah.
And it's like 67, and it's just something about it reminds me of this as well. I don't know. It's something about the ticking of the clocks, and even just the concept of time, right? Because, you know, my understanding was this record, part of what made it important too was like dealing with social issues that they hadn't necessarily dealt with before, or, you know, the lyrics had gotten more mature, more serious. But there's just something about going into On the Run and then time. It's so eerie. Like does this album, like, well, you've seen it with a light show.
It could definitely scare you, and I think that was their intention. Like some of the songs were about fear of death, and fear of, Roger Waters' fear of flying and things like that. And they really kind of tried to scare you, I think, or at least tried to make you feel their own fears, like at the time, of things they were feeling, like politically, or just like actual fears of traveling so much and yeah, that was just something, Roger Waters was scared of. It's like dying in a plane crash, especially at a time where, it was happening to big stars here and there, So
that's right, yeah.
But yeah, there's some I think in that song actually, there's like some plane crash or explosion, like crash sounds, and that was all meant to kind of like be, just like almost reading his mind.
Amazing.
But yeah, the way they did all that stuff with the sequencer, so that that sequence of notes, it was them just playing it into a sequencer and then hitting record, and then it would loop it back, and they can control the speed, and then they would put that through an oscillator, and like just the effect was was incredible. But yeah, I
That was
remember
like,
being a kid, like watching that in the laser light show and just like tripping out, you know.
yeah. And then the like Nick on that fast, that hi-hat, like with it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's incredible, but it's terrifying. But like you said, I guess it's because, to your point, that those were like real feelings, real fears that they were able. I mean, it's incredible that they were able to translate and transfer that into
Hmm.
the music and make you feel that too.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool that the way the album is, like you can skip over that stuff and just listen to the songs sometimes, you know. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
segues. Um, so I think there were for sure moments where I just wanted to hear the songs and I would skip that stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But there was
Yeah.
sometimes where you just wanted to completely hear the album.
I mean, that goes to what you were saying at the top, which was like, you can go as deep as you want with this record. Like you
Yeah.
can kind of go surface and get something amazing out of it, and then like go deep and be teleported to, Mars or something, Saturn.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
That song "Great Gig in the Sky,"
Hmm.
the Great Gig, it feels like it's almost like a little reprieve after time. But it's got that amazing slide guitar. Do you like slide guitar?
I love it. But
Yeah.
that's pedal steel. So that's the lap steel. So when it's
Oh.
flat,
Hmm.
I can't play that, but I wish I could. Yeah, it's one of the most incredible sounding instruments ever.
It is. Oh, it's
And
amazing. So
they
what would
they use it all
mhm.
over this album.
So that's called steel. So
Pedal
that's
steel.
pedal steel.
Yeah.
That's different from a slide.
Yeah, a slide like I lost all of mine. Or there might be some around here, but a slide you can use one on the guitar, but it'll just never have the same response that a pedal steel will have. But also a pedal steel you can tune to specifically get chords that you can slide up and down. And on the guitar, it's tuned different, so you can't really get the same kind of voicings on the guitar.
Oh.
So, but a pedal steel, you can get a bunch more notes in there, and you can kind of tune it in a certain way to where it just sounds incredible. You can't really do that with a guitar.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's usually
Yeah.
triads. Like they're usually moving triads around and six chords and things like that. Like
Hmm.
on that record, but it just sounds. The pedal steel just sounds way better than the guitar for that kind of thing.
Ah,
Yeah, there's even
interesting.
documentary on this album, like the classic albums series, and they showed David Gilmour playing those parts, and he's sitting down at the lap steel and with a slide and doing it.
That moment where Claire Torrey sings that vocal
Mhm.
part on Great Gig in the Sky, it kind of brought to mind, I mean, in a very different context,
Mhm.
but it kind of brought Abby to mind with
Oh yeah,
the Max album, the We Insist album,
huh?
where she it's like that guttural, visceral, just that scream. And I always wonder, I was like, I wonder if she checked out, Abby Lincoln. But I mean, it is so like, it's wild, like her performance. Like, what
It's
do
great.
you,
I watched like a interview with like of that track where Richard Wright is talking about it, because it was basically like his thing, where he went in and just started playing this song on the piano, and then they just started adding to it. First the pedal steel, and then he had the idea to add vocals onto it, like just an improvised solo. And so the track was already finished, and that was the last thing they were doing. I think they did it during the mixing, so the track was pretty much already done. They were just trying it, and she went in there, and it was like one take, and then she came out and she was like, "I'm so sorry," and they were like, "What are you talking about? That was incredible." And she came out of there just like, "Yeah, that was terrible." Like she thought she overdid it.
okay.
Yeah,
Hmm.
she apologized when she walked into the control room.
Little did she know, she like,
Yeah, and they were
did
like, "No,
something.
we're keeping that, like, for sure."
It's so good. It's so good. She has like this Janis Joplin kind of tone.
Mm-hmm.
But she's like
Oh, but
flying
she's
all
yeah,
up
she's
and
hitting every change, and like there's nothing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And it really it just adds, like you said, it just adds this other sauce to the song that wasn't there. I mean, that's amazing. They're as musicians, it's one thing, but then just like their producer hat that they wore
Mm-hmm.
for this record is unbelievable. Like knowing what little touches it needs,
Yeah,
that
and,
kind of thing.
saxophone solos, and like there was a lot of stuff they added. Um,
Yeah.
just trying stuff out, and like that really worked, and that make the album what it is.
Mm-hmm. How rare is it to have a rock song in 7?
Oh yeah, that's true. Money is in 7. It's really rare. I mean, I can't really think of any other ones. I'm sure there's some out there, but like, um, and there's been a few in history where there's like a mixed meter, but maybe changing meters. But this one it's just 7, like in your face. Like even the way it starts, like it's like 7 sequences of money being exchanged, like a cash machine and like thrown in a bucket and things like that. But even that's in 7, like like all those sounds are 7 sounds that repeat, and then it sets up the meter. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's very like 7. We are in 7, but like, but at the time nobody was doing that. So I mean, there was take 5,
Right. Right.
and that was kind of very smooth, like a 5, almost felt like a 3. But this was just like very 7/4. They said it's 7/8, but I hear it's just 7/4. But 7/8 I think of as being a faster, like 7, but they describe it as being in 7/8. But it's just in 7. So
right.
but yeah, it's pretty rare. And it's a blues,
It is.
and it's just a blues in 7, really, like a minor blues.
Right.
Maybe they were popular like where they were, like New Orleans, that group, Ellis Marsalis, and they were playing stuff in odd meters, but it wasn't like the being talked about so much.
I mean, I think that's a great tune. And to your point, it is a blues. Like I didn't hear it, so it sounded bluesy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
yeah,
actually,
it kind of. I mean, it's not like a traditional blues, or I mean, like but it has that thing where it does go to the 5 chord, where like. It doesn't really go to the 4 chord, but it I guess it's not really blues, but it does do that kind of like a where it goes to the 5 chord and then
right,
and then back to the 1 chord, but it doesn't really ever go to the 5 chord. So it's not really like a traditional blues or anything, but it has that thing, and just a killing bass line, like one of the most really melodic bass lines.
Yeah. And because it's funny, I think about that time and just how, because that was the single when it came to the US.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think we should definitely give an honorary mention. I don't want to jack up his name, but Bashkar Manan, who was the EMI executive.
Oh, I know. I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. When you hear about the great, record men, his name tends to, I think, escape us. I mean, especially him being also, an Indian man, a man of color. I had never really known as much about him as some of the record men that we think of, in the 60s and 70s. Capitol was, not doing very well, and he was at EMI in the UK and had sort of brokered this deal, with the US, and Money was the first single. And, I just think that's dope. And for that to be like the song that they lead with, on this album, I think that's kind of great.
Yeah, it's not even common to have a tune like that in 7, but for it to be on the radio, like on the charts, is a whole nother thing. I mean, the only other band from that time period that could do something like that was like Rush, where they had like songs in 7 and different and 5 and the music is so good and they're playing it so strong that you just don't even notice. You're just like, it just sounds like 4, or it sounds different, but the melody is so strong that you can sing it without even knowing that you're singing an odd meter. And so, yeah, that's another great band is like Rush. I mean,
I'm not
incredible.
that hip to them.
Oh my God, that's some of the most amazing tunes ever written. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, you're gonna have to send me some stuff.
Brad Meldau just does a version of one of their tunes, just a section of it. It's one of the coolest sections of one of their tunes, and he makes a whole like 8-minute piece out of it. It's incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, on his newest album. But yeah, the songs are incredible. Not all of them, but the good ones are incredible. And every band has their songs, but their best songs are incredible.
Well, it's interesting. You brought up Meldau. I think about, jazz in the last, I'll say 20 years, where you'll have jazz musicians playing, Radiohead tunes or Bjork or Rush, in this case. And you were part of an album that was called Jazz Side of the Moon.
Yeah,
Jazz Side of the Moon with drummer Ari Honig and Seamus Blake on saxophone and Sam Yahel on keyboards, on organ for Chesky Records. How did that come about?
That came about, I had just toured with Josh Redman's band, which had Sam Yahel on keys. And so we were coming off the road. We hadn't played in a while. I think that was 2005 to 2006. And so I hadn't really seen a lot of Sam, and he just called me out of the blue one day. That came out in 2008, right? So probably somewhere in 2007, he calls me and says, "Hey, what are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, I'm in town, but so I show up at Fat Cat and we rehearse, and he's like, it's a project, it's going to be we're going to re-record all the music from Dark Side of the Moon, and I'm going to do the arrangements. And so it was definitely a Chesky concept record of just redoing that record, but with kind of jazz arrangements and jazz musicians. So at first I was like, oh man, this is going to be bad. And because it's just like if somebody says, we're going to do Songs in a Key of Life again, but like all jazz arrangements. And except this was a little bit easier because it was like, okay, well, a lot of these songs are just jam tunes, and it's not as huge of a hit record as Songs in the Key of Life, but it's one of the most iconic records. So I was like, okay, and these are great musicians, so it's going to be cool. And it was. And it was one thing that we really just went in there and rehearsed for like an hour and a half. The next day we recorded the album, and that was it. It was all just full takes and one microphone, because that's the way that Chesky Records. You know what? I have it here. There's like a diagram inside of the album of how we were set up.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, hold on. Let me grab it. And it's funny because a lot of people think that this is my record, or they think that it's Sammy Hell's record. It's just all of our names are on it. Like Sam did the arrangements, but it's not really his record either. It was just he took the gig. But yeah, check this out. Like yeah.
And there's the mic out in front.
Yeah.
There.
So we set up around it. So that's it. I mean, it was. We did it, and I didn't really remember anything about it, and then it just came out. And people always mention this record to me, like, everywhere I go. It's like, oh, I love that Jazz Side of the Moon record. And I just kind of giggle because, it was one of those things where it could have been really, really bad.
Yeah, it could have gone another way, right? It definitely could have. Yeah. I mean, what was the secret to, because I checked it out a few times, I think it's really good. I mean, I think it's a wonderful
I mean,
record.
Seamus kind of really does a great job on it, Seamus Blake. And Sam, you know, because it's organ and it has all the, and it was recorded in a church, it just has this vibe. I just kind of, this was back when I didn't really use much effects at all. And so I'm basically playing with just a straight tone in this church, which is super echoey and reverby. And so all of the echoes on the album, I mean, I'm using some effects, but most of it is natural echoes. So they were putting the sound out in the church in different places. So they were recording and it was going through the board and then being broadcast back. So then there was natural delays. And they were doing stuff like that, like during the recording. I mean, yeah, Chesky it's a cool label, you know? It's kind of just two hippie guys that were like, we're going to do all our recordings in this church in Chelsea with one microphone.
It's so successful. Like, you would think that could be a disaster for so many reasons, like, and also just like how echoey a church is, but it adds to, because I was going to ask you that, like, how did you manage to tap into, because on this record you hear the mystique, you hear, like you said, the reverb and the echoes, and it still has this dark, eerie kind of vibe, even though you guys weren't using sequencers and running it through. Yeah, you guys managed to do that.
I mean, the one thing is, we had all heard that record a million times, you know, Seamus for sure. I had a history with it, although I hadn't listened to it in years. And even now, like, I kind of revisited the album. I was like, wow, I'm hearing all this different stuff that I didn't really hear before. And, you know, I'm kind of excited to hear the remix of Dark Side of the Moon, to hear like even more stuff there, because the band themselves are saying there's stuff that got lost, or, you know, just old tapes, you know, third generation tapes of, you know, pressings and things like that. So, but yeah, we had all checked out the music and have a history with that. Our thing was just like, let's try not to ruin at least the vibe. Like, we'll never make it as deep as Dark Side of the Moon. Those guys were in the studio and together as a band, like, coming up with ideas. Like, there's no way you can ever, with one rehearsal at Fat Cat and then a live session, and in any way touch that. So it was just more like, let's just jam the tunes and not ruin it as much as we can, you know? So, but there was not like any heavy thought like put into it. I don't know how much time Sammy Hell put into it. And I talked to him last night, actually, just coincidentally, because I've only talked to him once in like the last, I don't know, 6 years before that. And so I called him. We had a mutual friend that passed. And then, so I called him about that. And I was like, man, coincidentally, I'm doing this interview tomorrow about Dark Side of the Moon. And then he just kind of giggled. He's like, oh yeah, we did that record. And that was about it. That was the extent of the conversation.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where I get it, like, you know, you giggle and that, you know, it's like Dark Side of the Moon, Jazz Side of the Moon, you know, but it's, thankfully, and I think because of the caliber of musician that you guys are, and like you said, the not going into it, because had you guys probably done some overthinking, it wouldn't have been what it ended up being.
It would have been a little bit terrifying too. Like, it was just better to just do it. You know, there was no time to think about it. Like, even for Sam, I think he did all those arrangements the day before the rehearsal.
There's this really funny moment in when you guys are doing Money, and Seamus quotes "We're in the money" on his solo.
That's classic Seamus.
Yeah, just, you know, it made the album, but like, you know, but these high caliber musicians like playing on, you know, a line or like doing, you know, it just. It's a great record. It's great, you know.
You know, and he's playing with Roger Waters.
You did tell me that. Yeah. That's right. Because he's doing a farewell tour, right?
Yeah, so he was playing with Roger. I don't know how he got the gig. And I don't know if that album has anything to do with it, but it would kind of be cool if it did. At least somebody got something from it. Yeah. I mean, and he sounds great. And of course, it's just like, yeah, if you had Seamus on Dark Side of the Moon, it would have been, maybe it would have been too good. You know, like, it's almost better that it was this kind of really bluesy sax kind of like a little bit out of tune and
Yeah.
kind of really harsh tone. But there's some moments on the record too where that tenor player is, I can't remember his name, where he's playing some really beautiful stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Really
Mm-hmm.
soft, and it's almost like, wow, it almost sounds like Joe Henderson for just like a couple of notes, like really beautiful kind of additions, like ad libs in the background.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. I wanted to tell you about, because I remember I was telling you there was like a couple of Stevie Wonder like um intersections with Floyd. At least so this is me being a
Oh, okay.
conspiracy theorist.
Mm-hmm.
Total conspiracy theory stuff. But the artwork of the album, right,
Mm-hmm.
that you have displayed.
Yeah.
If you look at Music of My Mind, if you look at the vinyl,
Mm-hmm.
the gatefold, there's
Oh, I've never
the
seen the
same.
vinyl.
I'll take a picture of it for you
Okay.
and send it to you. It's almost exactly that, like the
Really?
pyramid with the rainbow shooting out of it. I forget the guy's name who did the art design. Yikes, I can't think of his name.
You're talking Music on
But
My Mind? Which record were you talking
yeah,
about?
yeah, Music of My Mind. Yeah, which comes out in
Yeah.
72.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, 72, 73, they both have this pyramid with this rainbow. I thought that was really interesting. And then I thought about that first album that Floyd did when Sid was still in the band.
Piper, that's their
Yes,
first record.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a song on Stevie's Plants album called Power Flower.
Yeah.
And he says, right, he's like, Pan is my name. I live outside the door. I have to keep the score of things around you. And then he says, fire and air, earth, water, I prepare. I am the piper at the gates of dawning. And then he goes into it, it's not magic, it's not madness. But I was like, oh, so I started like kind of doing a deep dive. So I guess it's a book that came out, like it was a children's book that Sid Barrett, it was like his favorite children's book. But Pan was like the god of the Pan Piper or something like that. I just thought it was interesting that Stevie quoted that. So who knows,
I mean, all of that music, I'm sure, I for sure know that they were into Stevie. And, I'm sure Stevie, there's no way, when something's that popular on the radio, that you can't really avoid it after a while. So I'm sure that album of any of the Pink Floyd albums, Dark Side of the Moon, came onto his radar, but he might have even heard the earlier records. I didn't really hear any of that early stuff until way later. I mean, when I was into Pink Floyd, it was Dark Side of the Moon. Even The Wall was maybe equal until I started going to those laser light shows. But The Wall, and then of course Wish You Were Here. Those were like the three albums I was really checking out. And those are the songs that were always on the radio. Like you couldn't avoid them. Like they were on the radio every night. Every time we went out, the classic radio stations were playing those songs. So
okay.
Yeah. But Wish You Were Here, it's funny. I saw Pink Floyd in 1994. And
what?
Yeah. This was back at the time. So my same friends that I would drive around with listening to this record and first took me to the laser light show. Also, Paul was the one who got me into jazz. He's the one that played me, Tony Williams for the first time with Alan Holdsworth.
Your drummer friend?
Yeah. And so, his girlfriend worked at a grocery chain called Fiesta in Houston. And she worked for Ticketmaster. And she was in the booth, and she would pull tickets before they went on sale. She could, so all of those front row people, they were either, super rich or just, the workers that were working for Ticketmaster that knew the managers, because the managers could pull, not the regular employees. So we went to see so many shows, like fourth row, third row, first row, center stage, kind of things like that.
Like who did you go check out?
I saw Van Halen. We saw Steely Dan. We saw, of course, Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd was the best tickets we had. of all of them. We had center stage, front row. I mean, Gilmore was like right there. And I still remember it. I don't remember most of the concert because they were playing a lot of the new music, which I didn't recognize. Of course, I was like more into the old records. And old records, I mean, at the time, they were like,
Right.
Not even 20 years old. So,
Right.
but that's old for a band, Most people do not produce hit records for more than 20 years. So,
Facts.
but that show is the only show in Pink Floyd's history, which I just found out. I didn't know this until like 2 nights ago. That's the only show in Pink Floyd's history that ever got rained out. And that's what I remember about the show the most, is how disappointed I was that it got rained out. What I had forgotten is that it got rained out an hour and 40 minutes into the show. So I actually saw an hour, 40 minutes. I don't remember that. I remember them playing Breathe and like certain songs. But I remember it being rained out way earlier than it was. But they were almost done.
So it was an outdoor stadium?
It was at Rice Stadium. And they never played Houston again after that. So I'm so glad I went. But we had, that was, all I remember is like finally I'm seeing Pink Floyd and we're front row center stage and it fucking got rained out.
And it rained. Oh my.
And they were playing, I mean, it was at the height, it was at the climax of the concert. So they were getting to the real big hits and they were playing another brick in the wall part 2. And it was the heaviest thing I've ever heard. Like, and I just listened to a recording of it. There's a few recordings of that concert on YouTube, just the audio.
What?
Yeah, just people in the audience for the audio. But there's one where there's a guy who's sitting like just a few rows behind us, center stage, 11th row. And it sounds incredible. Like and they're playing that tune and the bass and the drums just sound like the heaviest thing I've ever heard. And way, way, way heavier than the album. I mean, they're rocking out big time. And then the next song they start is Run Like Hell. It's another older tune of theirs. And it just stops. There's this guitar part that has all this delay, like kind of slapback delay. And it's timed and it creates this really cool effect. And all of a sudden you can just hear all the delay go away and it's just guitar, like with a really thin tone. And then and then he goes, dee-don, dun, 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 dun. All right, that's it. No. Because, I mean, all the electricity was shut off. I think they started getting shocked, like some of the piano player and the guitar, David Gilmour had already been shocked. Like, because it was raining and the wind was blowing and it was blowing on stage. And I remember that. I was like, man, it's just a matter of time before, they call the concert. And they were still trying to play it, and you could hear stuff malfunctioning, and like the delays were going off, and then the keyboards would drop out. And they had already stopped a song, and they were like, "We can't do that tune. We're going to move on to the next one." And then they were trying to finish the show, but but then after a while, the actual manager of the band pulled the plug, like literally, and it's just like, I'm not, you guys are going to kill yourselves. You're going to get shocked. And so they cut the sound, and then that was it. He just looked at the audience. He was like, "Really sorry, but we're gonna call it."
Oh man,
yeah.
I think about that Diana Ross concert in Central Park. I think it was like early '80s, like 80 years now, 82. I don't remember, but it's like it's just like torrential rain pouring down, and she's just she's doing her Diana Ross thing, and it's iconic. It's like. It's what made it iconic. But I wonder, like, man, like now that I think about it, that was probably really dangerous for her to be out there like that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's one thing if you're singing into a microphone. It's another thing if you're playing a guitar that's plugged into a million, or even at the keys. Like the keys are a little bit safer, but there's playing guitar while you're standing in a puddle of water and you're connected by a cable into like all these amplifiers and like direct into generators, probably extremely dangerous.
I actually was thinking about her band, like for the record, I was thinking about her band, but also
no, but if she touched the microphone stand and she was standing in water, then it's the same thing. But if she was just singing into it, she's pretty safe.
Gotcha. But the fact that they tried to stick it out, but nowadays they have like big, like, like overhead, what do you call those, canopies
Well,
and things like
they
that
had
now, right?
that. It was just the wind. It was the wind was
Okay.
blowing the water onto the stage, like in it was crazy. It was a
That's
huge
so
storm, and,
messed.
and on the recording you could hear it. It's just like all the thunder in the background. It was a huge storm.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and
Oh
then
my
we were just
gosh.
like, that many thousands of people like trying to walk back to their car in the rain. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And
Oh
luckily it
my
was it
gosh.
was that far into the set, so people were just like, yeah, let's get out of here. Otherwise, if
Yeah.
it was at the beginning, they would have been pissed, and who knows. It's
Want their money
it's it's
back
it's
and
Pink Floyd, so it wouldn't have been as bad as maybe another band. But you know, people
right.
people lose their mind when they want to see the band and they can't.
Yeah. I mean, just you having front row second, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
it was
front row
crazy.
center seats and it gets rained out. But like you said, you got to see probably 80% of the show. I
Yeah,
mean, like you said, they were probably about to really get into
yeah.
the pocket.
There was stuff in the set list they didn't get to, like "Comfortably Numb" and like big hit songs. But they had played
Mm-hmm.
at least like four. They played "Money," they played "Breathe," they played uh, "Wish You Were Here," and when they play "Wish You Were Here," that's
Mm.
when you realize that's their biggest song ever. I mean, the crowd went insane.
Wow. A lot of
Yeah.
people argued that that's the superior record. I mean, I don't know. I don't get into those debates, but do you think it's a better album? Better is
Um,
also very subjective, but
I think it's a more commercial, like that song especially. It's just, oh my God, it's time when you
Mhm.
hear them playing it live. Like I listened to that whole concert, not the whole thing. I skipped over it until found my favorite tunes, but like when they play that, I felt like I was there. I was like, wow. I remember the feeling of being there when they started this tune and hearing the audience freak out. And you realize it's one of the greatest classic rock songs ever written. I mean, it's anybody can be into it. A 40-year-old guy with long hair or a 13-year-old girl in the suburbs that's just crying in her room. Like everybody can hear that song, and dig it.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
yeah. It's like it was the one of the most requested songs to learn when I used to teach guitar to beginners. Everybody wanted to learn that
Wow.
song because it's just that opening line. Yeah.
Mm. Do you have a favorite song on this record?
On Dark Side of the Moon,
Hmm.
I it's hard, but I really like us and them. Yeah, it's a beautiful and dark tune. It almost gets into that kind of like, because it has those major minor seven chords, or at least one of them, in there where it's where that kind of those sounds,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. Those chord changes. Um, but yeah, just like hauntingly beautiful.
Hmm.
Almost like kind of film noir, because of that major seven chord. Um, yeah, just like spooky. And the
Yeah.
climax,
Um,
the chorus of that tune is just like it's at the end of the out. Well, no, it's like midway,
it's almost at
but
the end. I think it's like
yeah,
the penultimate song, possibly, because I think after that is Brain Damage and
yeah. Brain damage is
yeah.
is another kind of starts quiet and then hits a huge climax. But yeah, they
Hmm.
start getting to a point towards the end of the album where it's just you can feel it getting to its
Yeah.
its climax.
Yeah, that arc is deep. I mean, my understanding is that it was written originally for a movie called Zabriskie Point.
The album.
That no, Us and Them.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's one of them. I think
Yeah.
that's the one. Yeah, it was written for a film score, and then the guy thought it was
Yeah.
too sad. He was like, "This is too sad."
Yeah.
And they
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it.
yeah.
They do it. They imitate him in an Italian accent. So he must be Italian. This is too
Right,
sad.
right. Yeah, like in the film apparently like did not do well at all. And then
Hmm.
they sort of reworked that tune. They must have known they had a gem on their hands, and then they kind of rework it for Dark Side, and it's one of the
Yeah.
most pensive. Yeah, and that whole like, when was the last time you were violent?
Oh, yeah. Oh, they interview like all their friends and staff and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just what rock album has a song like that on it? It's more like something you would hear like in 2000 rather than in 1973, you know? Like you would hear that like on Radiohead or like Tom York or something.
Ooh. And that I could now that's another rework I could hear. I could hear them do it. I mean, I know they don't cover a lot of stuff, but I could hear that.
Yeah, so I mean the songs are so, you know, melodic and you know, the chords are great. You don't really have to change anything. Matter of fact, I don't think when we did that Jazz Side of the Moon thing, we didn't really change any of the chords that I could remember.
Yeah. Not really. Yeah. I mean, there were some like time signature things, but other than that, it felt very like true to.
I have to go back and listen to
music.
it. I haven't heard it. I don't remember what we did, to be honest. I just kind of like put it on the shelf. I was like, cool, we did that. All right.
It's a thing we did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how do you feel about, I know there was a wave where there was a lot of, you know, of rock being explored in jazz music.
Yeah, when I moved to New York, it seemed that way. Like Radiohead and Bjork, people were really into that when I moved here.
Yeah.
And that's when I got hip to both of those artists. Like Bjork, I didn't hear until I moved to New York. And I think the segue was like Someone in Love. You ever heard her sing that? But that was, I think, one of the first times I heard Bjork. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, this is a pop singer singing a jazz tune. Like, and not even hiding it. Like, it wasn't like a rock arrangement. It was just like, oh, it's her duo with harp. Like, and they're just singing a standard. It was incredible. And then, you know, Radiohead, it was like, oh, wow, I can hear like all this harmony in this music. Like, no wonder jazz musicians like it, you know? Yeah, it was.
That's amazing. Because you started off as a serious like rock head, then you become a jazz musician, and then you're hearing later rock through the lens of jazz.
Right, yeah. I mean, and even when I listen to this music now, like I hear it still, as long as there's harmony there, like I still hear it like it's a jazz tune, you know? And in essence, like all these great classic tunes, you can break them down and just play them simply, and you don't have to reharmonize them or anything like that. Like the chord changes are great. Yeah, a good song is a good song, you know, and you, the same as like a lot of the jazz standards, not all of them, of course, but some of them, like My Foolish Heart, they're not really jazz tunes. You could hear them in a doo-wop band. You hear them played by country music artists. You hear them played by, of course, you know, the jazz artists, and you hear them played by kind of pop orchestras and stuff. So they're not really, they're just great songs, you know, depending on how you play that, like how the band plays them, and determines whether or not, you know, it's a rock tune or a jazz tune or something. A lot of the great rock tunes, like you can play them in a jazz context, like Nirvana songs and almost any band, as long as the song is good, like it works. You just change the vibe. You know,
right?
It's good melody, and maybe the lyrics might sound weird in a different style, but like, you know, if they're good lyrics, they sound good no matter what. And I think this was the first time Pink Floyd ever put the lyrics on the album, like printed in the design, like when you opened it. I think was Dark Side of the Moon, because it was the first time, you know, since Sid left the band, that Roger Waters and the whole band were just like, we finally found our new direction, and we feel confident, because they were just searching before that, you know.
I think metal might be the closest to them really starting to feel like, okay.
Yeah, metal had some cool stuff, and they were starting to feel like they were starting to write songs that would kind of be on an album like Dark Side of the Moon. But yeah, I mean, for a couple of years, I think they were just kind of jamming and seeing what would happen. You know, it's like Yeah, I couldn't imagine, if your had the leader, the founding member of the band leaves and he was writing all the music, and we were just like, oh shit, we're like, what do we do now?
Right. But you developed this course over the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
Standards in film. And I think when you were just describing, when I was asking you about how you feel about rock music being interpreted through jazz, musicians, and you were saying, good music is good music, and how these tunes can sort of um, shapeshift based on the interpretation or genre. I mean, that's sort of the foundation. Well, that's part of what you're teaching, right? In the standards course,
part of it
is
is
sort of the impetus, right?
yeah, a lot of these songs were not originally conceived as jazz tunes. The other part of it is that you can make them sound completely different with harmonic substitutions, not reharmonizations, but just like, reworking the inner voicings of any song to kind of sound like it's going to be on in a club where Charlie Parker's playing, or it's going to be on a Chet Baker album, or it's going to be a Miles Davis album, or a Coltrane record. So all these songs are like malleable and can sound much different without changing the integrity of the tune. And then some of them could be sung in 1944 by Dinah Shore and sound like Broadway. And then, 50 years later, Bjork sings it exactly the same. Doesn't really change much about it. And it sounds like a 93, alternative rock album. The songs are just timeless. So a good song is a good song. It just depends on the production. It's just like, wow, I'm just listening to a Jimmy Van Heusen song that was written in the 40s for, a movie. Yeah, so it's kind of incredible, like how modern some of the songs back then can still sound. And when you look at this, you could scale back all of these songs and just make them sound like standards if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I could hear Us and Them in like a Bette Davis, black and white movie. You can, like, the melody, it just sounds like something from that could easily fit into one of those films.
Yeah. No, they're great. They're great songs. I like the fact of how the album starts and ends the same way. It's like it starts with a heartbeat, and then it closes with a heartbeat.
I can't let you go without talking about Wayne Shorter for just a second.
Oh man, yeah, that was just
yeah.
Yesterday was a rough day.
Anything you want to share? I mean, I know it's such an immense. It's like,
I mean,
share about.
I just know that Wayne Shorter's, like, it's been every time a major jazz figure dies, I think of what's going to happen. What am I going to feel like when Wayne Shorter dies? Everything I was like, oh, well, I want to post this thing or play a tune of his or do something like that. And then it happened and I was like, I just kind of don't want to do anything. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was just like, wow, that's a drag. I mean, it's like there's a part of that musical history or excitement that was always there when, Wayne Shorter is still walking the planet. Like that music is that much more palpable. It's that much more real. And then, it hasn't entered that myth category yet where it's already a myth. Like, how the hell did he think of all that stuff? And then now that he's like actually physically not here, like, I never really got to play with Wayne, but I definitely got to be in the same room with him a few times. And just like, it's like, yeah, you can shake his hand and you feel what the inside of Wayne Shorter's hand feels like that wrote down all that music. And it's just like, okay, it's real, and so it's kind of, now it's entered that state where it's like, man, Wayne is not here anymore, right? But we still have music, but it's just it's a different thing. And yeah, he's like by far the most influential composer to most people, but for sure to me. So yeah, I mean, I was just learning a tune of his the other day, Sydney. Do you know this tune from Kelly Great? a Wynton Kelly record.
No.
It's kind of like a lost Wayne Shorter tune. And I've never heard anyone play it. And so I finally wrote it out, which took some effort because that record, the tape is so damaged that when they put it on the CD, it's totally warped sounding, especially that track. And so, and Lee Morgan is kind of out of tune in general on it. It's like when he was really young. He must have been like 17 at the oldest. And so he's playing a little bit out of tune, plus the tape is all wobbly. So then the tuning is just a nightmare. I'm just trying to figure out what the chord changes are. But it kind of makes sense. And so I finally wrote it out. And I think we're going to, I was like, shit, I want to play that tune even.
Yeah.
It's one of the most beautiful Wayne Shorter tunes ever.
It's on a Wynton Kelly record.
Yeah, it's like from 1958. It's on Kelly.
Wow.
It's the last tune on the record.
58, that's right before his debut record.
Yeah, I think he might have got signed, asked to do that record because of that Wynton Kelly record.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, but it's like the last song on Wynton Kelly's album, and you can just hear like there is nothing that sounds like that at that time. And there's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, that, you think of that was recorded before Kind of Blue or at the same time. It's like, man, there was so much music going around that wasn't as popular, or didn't have such a hit record. Like, that's what makes Kind of Blue so special. It's like this record. Like, there's so much music all these rock bands were doing, and including Pink Floyd themselves. And this record was just like, it was just beyond, it was just a magical moment, like concept record. And Kind of Blue is kind of like that. And it's not like you can't break it down as far as many places like as being a concept record, because they recorded a bunch of other music at the same time, and but when you put those songs together, it has that almost like it's a concept record, like modal tunes. Yeah, it's a little bit different, but yeah. Anyway.
Wow. No, I'm just going back to that earlier thing you were saying about Roger Waters and referencing Kind of Blue. And even though he was talking about referencing a particular change, a particular chord, in that same vein of what you're bringing about it being a concept record, I'm sure maybe even subconsciously that was a point of reference for that too. Because it does feel like you listen to Kind of Blue from beginning to end. It's a story. It just feels that way. It just feels like you start here, you end there. Like, you don't really start with all blues or start with
right. It needs to start with that intro, that so what intro.
It's got to start exactly, and end with flamenco sketches, right? It has to have that arc. So funny enough that he would reference that album, because that parallel that you just drew.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, I think they were thinking about their favorite music, I'm sure, whenever they were writing.
Yeah.
And that I can see how that album just sounded different to everybody at the time. And yeah, everybody was checking out Kind of Blue. It had an influence, even if you didn't realize it until, 10 years later, and you're in the studio and you're like, oh, that chord,
Yep. Exactly.
What can I use instead of a B7? Like what? And without even knowing, he doesn't talk about it harmonically at all. It's like he's talking about it like, oh, I just took this chord and just threw it in there. But the reason why it works is because it actually does function as the 5 in that key. It's just a different bass note. And so I don't even know if he realized that or if he did, but he definitely didn't. When I saw, you're talking about Richard Wright, the piano player. He doesn't say it. He just says like, oh, it sounded good there. Instead of playing a 5, I played this chord. But it is still a 5. That's why it works. If he had played it a half step below, it wouldn't have. So, yeah. Or if he had used the E flat 7 instead of the D7. So, yeah, just kind of things like that. It might have just been a crazy coincidence that it just subbed for the 5 and it worked the first place he threw it in. But yeah, it's really hip.
It is. It is. I love
because that chord doesn't really get used in rock until like Hendrix with, like Purple Haze, you know. I mean, he plays it in E flat, so then it is an E flat, because he's playing it as an E7 chord on the guitar, but his guitar is tuned down a half step, so then it sounds like an E flat. But yeah, that's the Purple Haze chord too. E7 sharp 9.
Okay, I totally have to go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
This is such an amazing conversation. I mean, you just took it places I was not expecting, you know, in
Nice.
the best ways.
Yeah, it's weird. I never really analytically looked at this record because it was before my jazz days, and it was before I could really hear what stuff was going on. But it has like an emotional effect on me, you know. And it's kind of the part of the reason I started playing music.
Where can folks find you, and what do you got coming up?
My website's just my name, MikeMoreno.com. Instagram is like moremike78. And yeah, I mean, what is coming up? I'm just doing I guess I go to Europe next month with my band. We're just doing a few gigs there. Yeah, but that's kind of like the next immediate thing that's on the horizon.
Nice.
Yeah, and we just did, you know, that Standards from Film album, so that's out. That's on all the various platforms, because that's a crisscross album. So like I let them put it up wherever, or they don't even ask me. They just put it up. So, but yeah, that's out, and but the website has all the stuff there, you know.
MikeMoreno.com.
Yes.
Mike, this was amazing. This was such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Milestones with Angelica Wiener is a production of WBGO Studios. Theme music produced by Riley K. Glasper. Recorded at Teal Octopus in Brooklyn. Episode co-producer Corey Goldberg. Check out the rest of WBGO's podcast lineup at wbgo.org/studios.